Hello, I'm Rampage665, and we're at the start of a brand new year, which means that for the third time I get to take a guess at what Bandai will be releasing over the next couple of months. But let's start off first by analyzing last year's predictions. One of the first things I predicted last year was that Bandai would once again start releasing more master grades in the year. They dropped back to 8 or 9 master grades released in 2011, and I predicted that Bandai would start increasing their number of master grade releases in 2012, which they did. We now had 13 or 14 master grades in 2012. I might have mentioned that it could have gone as high as 18, but let's just call that a good prediction anyway, shall we? And I was also right when I said that Bandai wouldn't be releasing any master grades from Gundam Wing in 2012, which they didn't, not after the heavy arms in January, which we already knew about when I did the predictions last time. However, I also predicted that Bandai wouldn't be releasing any more master grades from Gundam Seed after they released the Dual Gundam, and I was completely wrong about that one. So let's throw that into the failed predictions pile. Another one of my better predictions is that Bandai would be releasing a master grade Tall Geese. I did, however, say that it had a very, very slim chance of being made into a master grade, but I'm just gonna go out on a limb and call this a good prediction anyway. But when it comes to Gundam Age, I might have slipped up when I said that Bandai would be releasing some mobile suits from Gundam Age outside of the lead Gundams, which they obviously didn't. They even cancelled the Gafran, which was supposed to be released in May, so that's a pretty bad prediction. Another one of my brilliant predictions was the Real Grade Justice. I kinda sorta mentioned it last year, said it had a low chance of being made, but Bandai made it anyway, and it still counts as a good prediction. But moving back over to the bad predictions, I might have said that a Real Grade line would be moving into 00, Gundam Age, even Gundam Wing, and I proposed a new Gundam Real Grade. Yeah, none of that stuff happened. However, I was right on the mark when I said that Bandai would be releasing a real grade of the Mark II Gundam, and I even predicted that at some point Bandai would start raising their prices up from 2,500 Japanese yen, which they did with the Zeta Gundam last November. But speaking of the Zeta Gundam, I also said that Bandai wouldn't be making a real grade Zeta for at least 2 to 3 years because the transformation would be way too complicated. Boy, did they prove me wrong. One of my other predictions for the real grade line was that Bandai would start going more into the mass-produced mobile suits, especially the Jim and the Goof I mentioned, and Bandai announced that they are considering producing those in the real grade line. Technically not a 2012 prediction, but it's still good. But the real grade line isn't the only new product line Bandai has. They also have the Mega Size line, and I said that it would start picking up again, and instead it completely died off, so that's a bad one. I said that in 2012 Bandai wouldn't be doing any more high grades from G Gundam, which they didn't. However, I did predict that Bandai would start going back to the high grade After War series, or maybe even go into Gundam Wing for their high grade Universal Century line, which they completely didn't. However, I did predict that in the high-grade Universal Century line we'd see a Byrland or a Masala, and we got to see a Byrland Custom, which is close enough, and the Masala is up for release somewhere in 2013. I did suggest there would be a perfect grade at the end of 2012, Unicorn, Age, or Freedom, and we didn't get a perfect grade, so that's a bad one. So how does it all add up? Well, I was about 50% right, 50% wrong, which is a lot better than my first try, where I was like 99% wrong. So things are looking up. Maybe this year's predictions will be 60 or 70% right, or maybe I'll be completely wrong. That stuff happens too. But speaking of this year's predictions, it's time to get started on those. I'd like to start off with Gundam Wing. I think we have a fair chance of seeing an anime version of the Wing Zero, not the Endless Waltz, the classic Wing Zero we got to see in the anime. However, I also think there's a good chance that we'll be seeing the rest of the customs or the Endless Walls second versions of Heavy Arms, Sandrock, and Nataku. Maybe even a Tallgeese tree. However, that's a really big long shot. I don't think that will happen. Let's move on to Gundam Age. Now, Bandai's already announced 2 master grades for 2013, but will we see any more? Personally, I'd love to see an H2 double bullet. However, chances are very slim, seeing as Bandai skipped ahead to the Darkhound. And as for the variations on the H3, the Fortress and Orbital, I'm thinking it probably won't be happening this year. As well as the Age FX full burst version, I seriously doubt that we'll be seeing that. Onto Gundam Seed. We're getting the HD version of the Ailstrike, and personally I am hoping that we'll also get a 2.0 or HD version of the Freedom. And using the same design, Bandai could finally make a master grade Justice as well. Something else they might do is the Providence. I'd give it a lower shot, however, seeing as Bandai also did the Apion last year, we may be getting a Providence later this year. The high definition version of Gundam Seed is apparently a big success because Seed Stargazer is also being released onto Blu-ray, and with that might be the Stargazer Gundam's only chance to be released in master grade form. And Seed Destiny is also getting an HD remaster version, so we might be seeing some new master grades from Gundam Seed Destiny as well. The Gaia, Chaos, and Abyss Gundams are probably out of the question, but we might see a Blast Impulse or a Savior. Another show that's bound to get some master grade releases this year is Gundam Unicorn, and the obvious choice is the Banshee Norn, which we'll be seeing in the upcoming episode of Gundam Unicorn. Personally, I'd like to see some of the older designs that we also got to see in episode 4 and 5, like the Jim 2, the Jagan, or even a Gira Zulu. And because Bandai released the master grade new Gundam version Katoki, pretty much everybody's expecting Bandai to release its counterpart, the Sazabi. Another thing to consider is that if Gundam The Origin gets an anime adaptation sometime this year, we can probably expect a master grade version of the Gundam from Origin as well. Let's go one scale smaller and start talking about real grade now. Bandai has announced a real grade Destiny, so there's a good chance that they're moving the attention from Seed over to Seed Destiny, in which case we'll probably be seeing a Force Impulse, and perhaps some sort of combination pack between the Blast and Sword parts for the Impulse. Although that will be a bit trickier than what Bandai had to do with the Sky Grasper, as there's a lot of parts on the main Gundam itself that have to be swapped out. Now, because Bandai has already announced 4 possible candidates for the real grade line, with the Zagok, the Goof, Jim, and the Grand Gundam, I'm guessing there won't be a lot of wiggle room for additional real grades this year, so I'm going to keep my number of guesses pretty low. Staying in 1/144th scale, the high grade Universal Century line. We're getting a master grade of the Senanju Stein in February, and I think that a high grade version would make perfect sense. I'd also like to see a classic version of the Byrland that Jared Mesa piloted. They already have the design, they just have to do some minor tweaks to make the original version happen. Other than that, I'm pretty sure that the high grade Universal Century line will pretty much be dominated by Gundam Unicorn, with episode 6 and perhaps 7 being released later this year. Which brings me to perfect grade. I've always said that if Bandai wraps up Gundam Unicorn, that would be the perfect time frame to release a perfect grade Unicorn. If we get Gundam Unicorn episode 7 at the end of the year, then a perfect grade Unicorn would definitely be possible. I also said last year that a Freedom would be somewhat likely because they have the Strike Freedom and there'd be a lot of similarities and it'd be easier to build a perfect grade Freedom. However, chances are still pretty low. I'm gonna wrap things up here. I have a lot more ideas, but not all of them make a lot of sense, so I thought I'd just leave them out of this video. But if you guys have something to say or add to this video, please comment. I'll be happy to read through everything and give you my thoughts. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching, everybody.